Okay, we are live. Beau and Peter with Running Light Ministries, and this is episode 129, man. Woo-wee. We are rocking it. Now, we're not quite on the, 1,284 that the Joel Rogan show is at, right?
That's right. We'll get there.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there. It's going to take some time, but, he's rocking, man. He's doing so much. So anyway, welcome to the Better Pleasure Podcast. This is 129th episode. We got some video for you guys today on Facebook. Super cool to be able to do that. I'm going to adjust Peter's mic just a titch because he's chilling and illin' in his chair like a lowrider. So we're going to have to get that thing going. Davey's over there. He's doing his thing. But yeah, so as always with live stuff, who knows what's going to happen and how this is going to work, but we're going to go for it. We're going to talk a little bit about what is sexual immorality today. Talk a little bit about the topic of consent and how that relates to our culture and the Bible and la-di-da, and that's what we do in Running Light, right?
That's right.
We kind of talk about sex, sexuality, love, and lust, all through a biblical lens. I love talking about culture. We do a lot of stuff on culture. We've done some fun ones, man. Some really fun ones. I even brought up some stuff about USA Today, decided that a man is a woman of the year. That's what National Review wrote. And they have a picture, and it's kind of an interesting picture. Just, I don't know, did you see that?
Yeah, I know who that is. He's in the government somewhere. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it's the health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's right. And
our new Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson,
yeah,
does not know what a woman is.
Didn't want to define that one.
Did not want to define what a woman is. So
No.
interesting things happening the last couple weeks.
Yeah,
Sure.
so that was interesting. I also wanted to go through at some point Catherine McKinnon's 2016 article, and I thought this would be a cool one for us to do commentary of, because you're out there, you're wondering like what's the deal with a lot of this kind of gender. Sex and sexuality, and Catherine McKinnon's kind of a lawyer, or she's kind of a lawyer. She is a lawyer, but she's kind of a major player in this, and she has been for years in the feminist movement. And here she is, kind of in 2016, doing this article, and I think she writes some interesting things that I think we would want to talk about. So this is called "Sex, Gender, and Sexuality: A Trans Advocate Interviews Catherine A. McKinnon." So that's very cool. And then, we had some interesting stuff come up on American news. And this is legit, too. This was legit. This was sexy summer camp led by witch teachers, children
I heard about that,
to masturbate, promote sex work. And the camp featured classes like Sex with Me Self-Pleasure Workshop, which teaches participants how to make the most out of their masturbation experience, and featured hands-on practice on a person's hands. Yeah, I'm like, what? But yeah, this is the real deal. And I guess the most recent thing is they took everything down off of their Twitter feed and everything like that. But
they got some backlash.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Just a little.
Yeah, but I thought, man, that's pretty bold of these young ladies out of it's like Kentucky or something.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where they were.
Yeah, I
from.
know. It was a state like that, which really surprised me because it wasn't like California. Like if it was in California, I'd be like, yeah, that sounds about right. But it was something like Kentucky or something like that, which kind of weirded me out.
Yeah, Missouri, or I don't know. It was definitely something like that.
Yeah,
right?
like the Midwest.
Yeah, so that was interesting, I found. And so with all the stuff that goes on,
and I guess that kind of does
world.
get into what I did want to talk about with
yeah.
you, which is the idea of sexual morality. So in order to understand ethics, in order to understand morality or what you ought to do with a particular thing, me and Beau talk about this often, you have to understand what it's for, right? So you can't talk about the morality or the ethics of, say, how to treat your wife or how to treat your friend unless you ask the question of, well, what is the purpose of that relationship? What's the intent? What were you made to do? What were they made to do? How do you guys interact with one another? And what's kind of governing that interaction? An easy way to understand it is when something is not designed and it has no intent, then there are no rules for it. So if I were to pick up a rock off the ground, I could use that rock however I want because it's not designed by anyone to do any particular thing. I could use it as a hammer if I want. I could use it as a paperweight. I could throw it at somebody. I could do whatever I want with that rock. And you can't say that I'm in and of itself misusing that rock because it wasn't designed. But if I take, let's say, a vehicle, a car, and I start pouring vodka down the gas tank, or I start driving it through a river, or I start doing something really dangerous with it on the road, someone can definitively tell me you are misusing that vehicle because it was designed. And when there's a design, there's a way to use it correctly and a way to use it incorrectly. As Christians, we believe that sex was designed. We believe it was designed by God, and it has a very important function. And we talk about this often, to glorify God is the prime function. And then there are different aspects of that move within the glorification of God. Let's say acting in love because God is love, or procreating because procreation does glorify God's attribute of being able to create in his image and likeness. So mankind can create in our image and likeness. To unite us closer to be with our spouses. For pleasure, that we can have and enjoy one another in a way that reflects the pleasures of God. So there's all these different things that filter under that umbrella. But when a culture kind of removes God, which is what our culture has done a while ago, I would argue, I would say the culture's kind of removed God from the equation a long time ago. But even before that, me and you talk about this as well, this is a little closer to when you were born. I was born way after that. The invention of the pill was really a radical move because up until that point, sex and pregnancy kind of went hand in hand. After the pill, I think that even the idea of sex being for procreation kind of vanished from people's minds. Would you say it's about accurate?
Yeah, I think there's many books that have been written on that subject that have kind of verified that. And obviously, so many sociologists have written about this as well. So I think that's a given. That's like I don't think that's something that's debated.
Like controversial.
Yeah, anymore. The idea that the pill definitely revolutionized the way sexual relationships functioned, and it certainly has opened up a world, of you might want to call it a lack of responsibility or a lack of consequence. I don't know if that's quite sure if that's really the picture, but that's what it seems like anyway.
Yeah.
You don't have a consequence, or
where we don't see sex as being something that is linked to responsibility.
right.
Where again, even back in the day where there were things like the pull-out method or kind of tracking your period or something like that.
What did you just say?
There were methods to avoid pregnancy, but still when you're having sex and you're not using protection, there's a very strong possibility you're going to get pregnant. And so the idea of sex having consequences, sex having responsibility baked into the cake was well understood. Nowadays, though, with the pill, contraception, and abortion being widespread and on demand,
and being big business.
Yeah,
I don't want to understate that. Growing up progressive, we're definitely against big pharma, and big pharma. When you look at abortion and you look at the pill, it kind of goes along with big pharma.
right.
Right?
A lot of money.
A lot of money
And a lot of
being generated.
abortive agents that are given out are pill form.
Right. That's what I mean. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're pill form. They are, you're getting it from the pharmacy.
Right. Absolutely. So this kind of manipulation of the purpose of sex kind of moved people into this. It kind of destabilized the idea of, well, what is sex for? If it's not to procreate primarily, it's not to glorify God, well, then what is sex for? And if we don't know what sex is for, then we also can't create a morality around it. I mean, we can't say that certain things are right and wrong. And so
Stop right there.
Yeah.
Hey, this is episode 129 of the Better Pleasure podcast. Okay.
Yeah. So if we don't really know what sex is for, then we can't really structure ethics around it. And some people in the 60s, the whole free love movement, the idea was, well, why should we structure any ethics around it? Maybe sex really does just kind of feel good. And why treat it any other way? Why think about the idea of family, relationships, responsibility? Why not just have fun? And that was the ideals of the free love movement. But still, people couldn't get totally around the idea of ethics for two reasons. Number one was the push of consent, meaning that everyone still understood that rape was one of the most horrible things that can happen to an individual. So you can't just say sex can be utilized in whatever way you want. Consent still had to be a fundamental part of it, and that does kind of fit into the recreational idea of sex. So if the purpose of sex is just for recreation, meaning it's just to have fun, then both parties have to have mutual amounts of fun. So consent kind of filtered in there. But then after that, then you had the move of the gay movement. And this is just my theory. I want to hear what you think about it as well. So the move of when the gay movement really started getting going, then I think a second type of morality got filtered into there. And that second morality was authenticity. So being authentic to your true sexual nature was something that was fundamentally important to every individual. That if you really wanted to be a fulfilled person, you had to figure out what you wanted to do with your genitalia, essentially, and that would define a huge portion of your personality and your identity. This is why so many people in the culture today are driven to identify with LGBTQ. They're really driven to identify with that organization. They want to make that a fundamental part of who they are, their sexual identity.
And I just got to be super duper honest because it's Running Light Ministries, and but if I was growing up in today's culture, I'd be part of LGBTQ. I don't know who wouldn't. Like, because you go, man, yeah, okay, I've been with someone of the opposite sex, and so quote straight, but maybe I won't always be that way. Like, you don't know. And so you go, hey, maybe I'm bi, So yeah, I fit into, maybe the bisexual model there. Or hey, maybe I find a guy attractive. Hey, maybe I'm gay, So it's to me it's very easy today just to be able to kind of, I could see why the younger generation would identify in LGBTQ culture. For one aspect of that, there is a multiple. There's a lot of options today, and who is going to know at the age of 14, like what really they are? It's like, who really knows that? I wouldn't know that. I would just be like, well, yeah, maybe I am that. Maybe I'm this. Maybe I'm that. I don't know. Um, to me, like LGBTQ would just be kind of a cool, like, hey, let's hang out. We're part of LGBTQ, almost like church has a youth group, or church has a college group, or church has a ministry. LGBTQ feels like a ministry. It feels like it's able to engraft people into it. And people that really don't know what they are, or they don't have a clear understanding. And I think that's more because there's a lot of options available today like no other time.
No, for sure. And I was thinking about the conversation you were having with your friend that you talked to me about just a couple hours ago, where he was mentioning his philosophy of how people get to know what they know. And, in philosophical thought, we call that epistemology, how we know what we know.
Yeah.
And he was mentioning that, like, it's based on the culture that you grow up in, things like that. I think a lot of the younger people today, they believe in order to be authentic, in order to have my sexual identity to be more authentically true, it can't be the default setting. Meaning that the default setting, whatever I'm grown up in, the hegemony, right? The way that people move.
Their ruling class.
Exactly.
It might not be the ruling class overall, but their ruling class.
That's right.
Their power, their structure power.
That's right. If you just go into that, then maybe you're not really being authentic to your true identity. So you need to kind of sort through it a little bit. And they've also taken away what we call the norm. So there was a movie that came out just a couple years ago, and in the movie, it was really pro the gay lifestyle. And in the movie, character asks, like, I don't understand why being straight is the default. Why isn't gay the default? And then it has kind of like, it's supposed to be a comedic moment where kids come out straight to their parents. They're like, oh, Mom, I'm into girls. And the parents are like, oh, no,
Right.
Why did we go wrong? And they're all freaking out. But I thought that was a really interesting moment, because they asked what we would consider a very simple question. Why is being straight the norm? Why is that the default setting? And am I really being genuine or true to my authentic self if I'm just going with the default? Isn't that a little vanilla? Maybe I'm something different. And there's that internal feeling within us that doesn't want to conform. We don't want to be a part of everyone else's system. We want to buck against it. We want to be a rebel. We want to be different. And that's a very teenage thing to do. So, again, like you said, it makes a lot of sense that there's a new gender invented every 5 seconds, that there's a new sexual preference invented every 5 seconds, because no one wants to filter themselves into the generic, the default. They want to go against it. And so these numbers are rising. And it's all down to this idea of you need to be authentic. You need to figure out who you are. You need to find your identity.
So let's talk more about this. You're talking about in the Bible, God created the heavens and the earth.
Right.
And that's how it starts. So it starts with a creator. And so if you don't have a creator, then you people are trying to figure out the meaning of sex. So in everybody's worldview, there has to be some kind of sexual immorality, some kind of distortion, if you will, to what they're holding to be true. I would imagine everybody's got some form of truth to what sex should look like, what sexual relationships, intimate relationships should look like. And most people don't want to define that in a Judeo-Christian way for the reasons that you just mentioned about hierarchy structures and all of our struggles with that kind of hierarchy structure. And so, we rebel, we say, forget it. We put on our suicidal tendency records and we say, forget you, man. But the culture does spew out this thing called consent. And I wrote down measuring consent. Like, how do you measure consent? Like, how does that work? Like, I guess my point is like, if someone says, hey, well, I think it just as long as it's consensual. Well, okay. But there are situations, I imagine, where someone on their side goes, hey, it's consensual. And in their mind, the idea of consensual is they have a definition of that. But in the other person's mind, they might say, well, no, my version of consensual is something different. So, do you think that is really going to work too?
Yeah, so basically if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is like, what if I think that you're consenting to something, or you're giving off a particular vibe or an intention that I'm reading, and I'm saying, okay, I believe you're consenting, but you're really not. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like if the sexual immorality of today is like, hey, as long as we just consent, right? Well, what exactly? What is that? Like, what does that look like? Like on a college campus, like you kind of get the vibe that the it's like, oh, you want to be intimate, I want to be intimate, that's consent. And we think of that. But there's instances where people are what we think consensual, or we think there is that the language we're using is the type that it is that both parties understand it as being, now we're consensual, but still someone will come back at the other one and be like, I'm suing you.
Right.
And
that's the problem with consent. So I was watching this video, I think it was like a month ago. A woman came out and she was just like, 80% of men are rapists. Like, she just said that. And she starts,
I've heard that before.
Yeah, she starts listing off all the things that a guy can do that she considers rape. She's like, you're with a girl at a bar and she's getting a little tipsy, you're a rapist. Right. You ask a girl, like, if she wants to have sex, she says, I kind of want to wait a little bit. But then you you do more foreplay, you kind of massage her into it, you're a rapist. You essentially are dating a girl and, she hasn't explicitly told you that you can go all the way, but you do it anyway, you're a rapist. You talk a girl into sex, you're a rapist. And she goes down this list. And when you're going through the list with her, you're like, well, a lot of these aren't rape. They're indecent. And again, as a Christian, I have an ethical structure to be able to say why these particular incidences are wrong, why they're bad, why they're not considerate of the other, why they're not why they're not loving, why they're not patient, why they're not kind or merciful or understanding, right? So I have a moral framework to be able to denounce those things, but the only moral framework she has is consent. That's it. So because she internally knows that these behaviors are wrong and they make her feel bad, but she doesn't have any type of complex moral structure to be able to call them out beyond consent, she has to filter them all into violations of consent. And a violation of consent is called rape. So there's a big danger into moving everything into this consent category. Because again, if you see something that's wrong and you know it's wrong, you feel it's wrong, but you don't know why, you don't have a moral structure that will allow you to say why it's wrong, then you have to call it rape. So you do have a lot of girls, the Me Too movement is a good example of this, where there's been accusations of rape, but was it really rape? They sit down and they talk with these girls, and there was an example of this where a girl was she didn't use the word rape, but the way that they wrote the article, it definitely seemed like there was a claim towards rape. I remember there was this one where a guy basically just hooked up with a girl, and they had consented to have sex, but then while they were having sex, he did something that she didn't feel comfortable with, so she felt like that violated consent, and she felt really used and misunderstood.
That's a good point. That's what I'm getting at is like, if consent is the main thing, then how do we, you're talking about like physically people do something, their bodies are consenting. Let me say it that way. Their bodies are consenting, right? So in the sense that they verbally have said like, oh sure, and green light, green light means go, and their bodies are consenting, but mentally you're saying it doesn't mean that necessarily they are, because someone might have a remorse, and
regret.
A regret that's coming from some kind of issue that's rooted in an ethic,
right?
But
they can't verbalize it. They can't articulate it.
Right. Because they don't have maybe God in their life. They don't have that idea that, hey, God created this for a certain purpose. Then they can't go there, right?
Yeah, and it gets into this also, the second morality, which is authenticity. So if a woman or a man feels like, well, no, I'm taking ownership of my sexuality and I'm being authentic, I'm living into my true self, and I want to have sex with this person, but yet I have sex with them and then I feel regret. Well, what happened? I can't claim I was being inauthentic, because I was. That's what I wanted to do. But I also can't claim that there was anything morally wrong with just hooking up with this random stranger, or feeling like I was using them and they were using me, right? I can't call that out. So I have to say they violated some sort of consent, because I have no other moral structure to be able to condemn them, right? So what Beau's saying, and what I'm trying to articulate as well, is that I might in the moment feel like, yes, I want to do this, but then after I have sex with someone, I might regret it. I might say like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe we rushed into things. Maybe we should have waited. We were just kind of letting our hormones talk and not our intellect, And how do I express that regret in a culture that says there's nothing wrong with hooking up without any consequences? There's no purpose to it. There's nothing wrong with it, right? How do I articulate that? Well, I can't. So I have to say, maybe I didn't fully consent. Maybe they pressured me into it. Maybe they talked me into it. Maybe there isn't genuine consent happening within my life.
Yeah. Do you see other problems with the issue, or with that idea of kind of today's culture of just using consent as kind of their go-to? Because most people, it seems like, don't want to get in too much into the what is right or what is wrong. They try to move away from those languages. So consent is used quite a bit.
That's right. So in our culture, we don't really use words like evil or immoral or something like that. So we only have a couple words that we can kind of brand people with, that everyone genuinely understands. Oh, we're talking about evil here. In my opinion, it's only racism, sexism, some sort of a phobia, or, like I said, violation of consent. Those are really the only ones we have. So if I feel like someone is doing something wrong, I have to filter them into one of those categories. I have to say, you're racist, you're a misogynist, you're a homophobe, you're this, you're that. Or I say, like, you're a rapist, you don't care about people. And you see these kinds of insults slung at people very haphazardly without any genuine proof, because, again, we've lost moral language within our culture. The idea of evil, right, wrong, good, bad. Those things have just kind of they've gone out the ether. And so we can only cling to these words that we feel explain it. And again, it makes sense, because the main kind of worldviews that are being promoted right now by our culture would be critical race theory, which filters all evil into racism. And then you also have gender theory, which filters all evil into gender ideology and sexism and phobias of that sort.
Man. Wow, where do we go from here, bro? No, yeah. I love the idea. I love that word. I think sexual immorality is a cool word, in that the word immorality is in it. And I know people don't like that word, and I certainly didn't either at one point in life. But I do like it when I just look at it and I go immorality. Well, it's obviously talking about morality.
Mm-hmm.
Are there morals? And I guess if you were to get rid of morals, then you would get rid of the idea of immorality,
Right.
right? So if we threw out morals, then what do we have left? What are we doing? What do we do? If we just said, hey, there is no morals, then how would we define what people do? Like, what are we defining that by? What is it? So even if you didn't believe in God, right? You have no belief in God, like I certainly didn't at one point in life. What do you define what I'm doing?
Right.
And
that's a good point, and it's one of the reasons why why I think our country is going in the direction that it is. So if you lose morality, then what has to take its place? The law, legality.
Yeah, and this is good.
That's right. So in other words, if the way that we're supposed to govern ourselves, and you read the Bible in the Old Testament, for instance, is you see this idea of ethical morality being conducted by people at the local level, right? So there's morality and ethics regarding how I'm supposed to treat my neighbor. There's morality and ethics of how I'm supposed to treat my parents, how I'm supposed to treat my brother, how I'm supposed to treat my sister, how I'm supposed to treat my wife, how I'm supposed to treat my kids, right? There's all these ethics and morality that are moving me to treat people in my local community in particular ways, right? And all of these things have accountability to God, right? I'm doing these things in order to honor God. That kind of moral structure is what's keeping everyone in line. And therefore, the government, right, all the government is designed to do is to punish or judge strong violations of the law. That's why in the Bible you don't see the government penalizing small things. What you see them stepping in to arbitrate over are major violations of the law, things where you'd have to you've stolen, you have to give large sums of money back to the person you stole from, or you're executed, or you're excommunicated, you're thrown out of the community. That's where the government steps in. But just because something's not illegal, meaning just because something wouldn't get me thrown out of the community or cause me to have to give back a large sum of money, it doesn't mean those things are necessarily ethical. It's the ethics that actually govern the society and make the society good. The law steps in to punish or penalize those who step outside the law. That's all it's designed to do. But when we throw out morality, then the only thing we have left is legality. And that's why tensions between the political parties have become so fiery lately. Because what you're having is whatever party is in power trying to strong arm the other side into their way of moral thinking. Right. And they do that through law. And I was listening to a really good podcast yesterday where someone was talking about that, and they say, like if we care about the morality or the ethic of freedom or liberality, then we have to start not top down,
right,
not government instituting all the morality that I like, but bottom up. How do I get my local community, the people that I'm closest to think the way that I do, right? And what institutions, like the institution of family, the institution of church, the institution of education, how do I get those institutions to reflect more and more of what I believe is right, so I'm living in a community where the people around me are behaving in a way that I approve of? Doesn't mean I'm approving of everything, but it means that I generally agree with the ethics that are surrounding me. And I don't need the government to legalize these smaller things, right?
Yeah.
Beyond that, and this is also very important, the law is completely inept in legalizing what we would call virtue. So the law can penalize you when you break the law, but the law cannot honor you or reward you for doing something good. In other words, I'm not going to get a check in the mail if I tell the truth today.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get some sort of a boost in my, 401k if I treat my wife well. Those are very virtuous and good things to do, but I'm never going to get rewarded by the state for doing those things. And what's more important, people who simply don't violate the law or people who are actively virtuous in their character, right? And Obviously, the answer is very clear. This is why in the Bible, in the Old and the New Testament, there's a much heavier emphasis on what we're electing to do than what we're resisting to do, right? So the Christian is mainly about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, right? That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to be the right kind of person. But the negative things in my life, I should be avoiding them, but that's not the prime focus. The prime focus is what I'm moving towards, not what I'm moving away from.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a danger. There's a danger that we have as human beings when we go in a direction without knowing something else. That's what Blaise Pascal wrote about so much, is that there's an equal danger, to knowing God and not knowing your depravity, and there's another danger of knowing your depravity and not knowing God.
Right.
And knowing, not knowing God and wanting the legal system to get involved in sex matters in the sexual ethics. Whoa! Emergency alert! Emergency alert! What's going on?
Someone kidnapped someone.
Someone kidnapped someone. Is that wrong?
That's what it says.
Yeah, I don't think that was consent. That's for sure.
Nicholas Cowan.
Yeah, totally. Online, live, all over the world now. The name. But you get the point that I'm making is that, if you throw out morality and you're just using the legality section, then it seems like there's a real a balance thing that's going wrong. And this is why. It's because, okay, if I'm not having a source outside of me that is benevolent, God who's benevolent, and there's all these things that I'm striving for, a loving God, he's striving me to be like him, this kind of idea, then and I'm wanting human beings who are not going to the benevolent God, but they're going to their own resources, their own intellect, to legislate sexual morality, even though they're not calling it that, but sexuality, then it seems like you're running into another. You're still doing the same thing. You're still trying to find a morality, but the source that you're going to is now just like you. And I can't imagine that the results are going to be good or positive, or because you yourself aren't so much good and positive. You need the outside source as well. You need the benevolence. You need the help as well. It just, to me, it seems almost circular. It's like the way you're trying to fix a problem is by, once again, the looking towards other humans that are just as selfish and just as greedy and just as compromised and just as oblivious and just as blind as you are. And it seems like that if we're putting sexual morality into the hands of the government because there's not a moral code that we're all running on in our heart. And it's interesting, the Bible says that we do have a sense of right and wrong in us, it's within us, but we're suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. So if I'm suppressing that truth, then, and I'm looking for Big Brother to say, oh yeah, you're doing the right thing, keep doing what you're doing, and I go, oh great, okay, I'm doing great. It's not like I've really gotten away from the deity. I've just kind of switched deities. I've looked to humans and I've propped them up and to try to get them on my page, so to speak, and feeling okay. Like Christianity and monogamy can't be right just because the government says that one man and one woman is right. That can't be the reason why we go, oh, it's right. Why? Because it's legal. No, the reason why it's right is because there's a source outside of us that has told us what the intent of our sexuality is. That's why.
Right, and this is what some theologians have called natural law. The idea of what is the role of government. The role of government is not to create law. The role of government is to enforce natural law. In other words, what's naturally already inherently true, the government then enforces the practice of that. The government is not there to just say like, hey, you know what? We've decided that this is right now, and so that's why you have a perspective from our founders that they believe that the government inherited their power from God, and that they were just trying to help people live within that. So in other words, they were just trying to create a structure that would best help people live into morality. They weren't trying to create a structure where they're like, we're going to force everybody to live the way that we want. It was this idea of there's an ideal. We want to point people to the ideal, and we want to remove all obstacles and benefit people who pursue the ideal, but we're not going to enforce it in any particular way. That was how they saw things. And that's very important, because when it comes to authenticity, one of the things that people complain about is when you set up a standard, when you set up an ideal, doesn't that disenfranchise and doesn't that hurt the people that can't live within the ideal? So if I say something like, well, one of the benefits of being married is that you can start a family, right? Why does God make the two one? Because he desires godly offspring. That's in Malachi chapter 2. Now someone would come to me and say, well, okay, well, what about all the people that can't have kids? What about the women who are barren? What about the person who's married to the love of their life, and tragically they get taken away from them and they just never want to marry again? They stay single for the rest of their life. Like, are those relationships somehow invalid? Are you trying to make them feel bad about themselves? Like, what's going on? The point of setting up an ideal is to set up something for people to shoot for. And yes, the concept is that a lot of us will fall short. We're not going to make it, and that's okay, right? I would rather feel bad about not living up to the ideal than removing the ideal altogether. So let me put it this way. So my dad, he didn't have a dad, right? His dad walked out on him. He didn't have a dad. He didn't grow up with a dad. And in his culture, he was shamed for that. People were like, you're a bastard. They used to call him that. They used to insult him for not having a father in the household. Now, that was bad, and obviously actively shaming people for something like that they have no control over, that's immoral, right? We as Christians say that's immoral. We're not supposed to do that. However, it is better for my dad to know, like, oh, the reason why I have a longing in my heart to have a male figure in my life that would be able to mentor me and to guide me through life is because that is the ideal, and I didn't have that. And I need to grieve over that. I need to feel bad about that. I shouldn't feel good about it. I should feel bad about that, because that was something that I should have had and I didn't have it. That's way better for him than for a culture to say, you know what, let's continue to make movies and TV shows of single parent households so that the people who are living in a single parent household feel more at home. They feel represented, right? So the removal of the ideal makes the people who don't have a dad and the people who do have a dad in the house feel the same. However, there is a true and genuine, this is what natural law means. It is better for you to have a father in the home, whether you recognize it or not. Whether the society recognizes that that's ideal or not, that is better. It remains true. It's a blunt fact. And it's better for the person to realize there's an ideal and I'm not living in it, and I grieve over that, than to remove the ideal altogether, and therefore to say it's equally valid to have one parent in the house or two parents of the same gender. It's equally valid. There's no differences. Everyone should feel the same.
And there's a way to get to tear this down so that you can say, oh, that argument doesn't work. Like there's a way to say this. Like, this is what I'm thinking. You could say, okay, like your argument is saying that, hey, it's better. We know just factually it's better to have a male in the animal kingdom, and like warm-blooded animals. It's good to have a dad and a mom. In our kingdom, it's good to have a dad and a mom. That's just natural law. That's just known. But if you say, I guess you could tear down the idea of dad, you could tear down the idea of male, and through different things, through different verbiage, so to speak, you can tear down like, oh well, what is men, or what have men contributed to society? Look at the history of patriarchy. And you can tear it down, to where you sit in a classroom, in college, and you go, oh yeah, you know what? Is it really good to?
Right. And that is an argument that people are using to go against what I'm saying. So in other words, when I say that there's an ideal, someone will say, well, what about this exception where the ideal, quote unquote, that you're talking about is abused, right? Is it better for a kid to have an abusive father? Well, obviously, that's not the ideal either, right? I'm talking about the ideal is having a loving father within the house. So yeah, it's better to have no father as opposed to an abusive father. But you know what's even better than that? To have a loving father.
Yeah.
So just by saying like, well, it can be worse in some instances, yeah, but you're still not addressing the main point. The main point is that there is an ideal of a father and how a father should behave towards his children. And you're not attacking that. You're just saying, well, I'm just going to pick out one thing that you said, which is male in the household, and I'm going to give you the horror stories of my dad being a jerk. It's like, okay, well, I'm sorry you had a dad that was a jerk, but that doesn't make fatherhood bad.
So basically, our culture right now has a morality, or there is a morality, or let me say it this way:
trying to construct
one,
right?
But they don't know how to do that. There's an elusiveness to that. We got to go because I know you got some stuff you got to do. So we're gonna have to end the podcast, but there is a sexual morality that's trying to be formed, but of course there is no objective truth that's being reached for or looked at or even believed in.
Well, there is one, and we can talk about it next time because I know you'll want to talk about this.
Right.
And that would be the experts.
Right. The experts, the state, that kind of thing.
The
it's
experts
science,
and the
Mustafa Aman folks.
That's right.
Right. But so sexual immorality today is certainly different. And what you're saying too, which is so cool, is like what we're doing is we're trying to tear down kind of
ideal?
Getting away from the ideal, without really understanding the ramifications of tearing down that ideal. Right? And not understanding that when you tear down that ideal, then what do you have? And I always equate it to baseball. It's like, what if you don't have an ideal in pitching? What if you don't have an ideal in catching? What if you don't have an idea as a first baseman of how to play that position? Baseball has so many unique positions to it, and every one is just that. It's unique, but it's all within the framework of the game.
Right.
And you can't just kind of play catcher the way you want to play catcher.
Right.
You can't just be a pitcher and pitch the way you want to pitch or play any of the positions that way.
That's right.
There's an ideal to it.
That's right. And that's why, one of the first moves, I believe, from what we call the ideal would be the participation awards.
Yeah.
Right. Is that we're going to reward you whether or not you live up to the ideal. And it's better, and again, if you want to quote studies, we found out that it's psychologically better for a child to feel like they lost in a fair and square game than to reward them for being lesser than. Because when you reward people for not living up to the ideal, what you're communicating is there is no ideal. Winners, losers, it doesn't matter, right? Kids who have dads, kids who don't have dads, it doesn't matter. We're going to reward everybody equally, right? When you do that, you take away something for people to strive for. And again, is the thing that we're striving for inherently good? Whether you reward it or not, is it inherently good? Is it inherently better for someone? Because if it is, and you're not pointing people to it, you're doing them a grave disservice.
Good point. So, hey, thanks for joining us on today's episode of the Better Pleasure Podcast. Take care and have a great day. You can always check us out at runninglight.org. You can always email us at the top right there. Beau at Running Light, Peter at Running Light. So have a good one. Bye-bye.